Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the English Lessons for All debate. Today we will discuss the motion. Child labor should be legal in some cases. We will begin with opening statements from each team, followed by opportunities for rebuttal, and then closing statements. I will then conclude the debate. Let's start with the affirmative team.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Esteemed colleagues, I stand before you today to affirm the motion. Child labor should be legal in some cases. Let us be clear from the outset. The affirmative team is not advocating for the exploitation of children, nor for hazardous work that jeopardizes their education, health, or well-being. What we are proposing is a nuanced, pragmatic, and compassionate approach to child involvement in certain forms of labor, under strict regulation and supervision, that can, in fact, be beneficial to children, their families, and their communities.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Esteemed members of the affirmative team and distinguished audience, I rise today to unequivocally oppose the motion. Child labor should be legal in some cases. The affirmative team attempts to frame this issue as a nuanced, pragmatic, and compassionate approach, suggesting that regulated child involvement in labor can be beneficial. But let us not be swayed by such euphemisms. What the affirmative proposes, regardless of the strict regulation and supervision they promise, is a dangerous regression, a fundamental assault on the rights and well-being of children. There is no compassionate way to legalize child labor. There is no beneficial scenario where a child's place is in the workplace rather than the classroom or the playground. Legalizing child labor, even in some cases, opens a Pandora's box of exploitation, undermines universal education, and perpetuates cycles of poverty. We, on the negative team, firmly believe that children deserve protection, not participation in the workforce. Their childhood is sacred, and their future depends on an education free from the burdens of labor, regardless of how light or regulated it purports to be.
The negative team dismisses our call for a nuanced, pragmatic, and compassionate approach as mere euphemism, yet their own stance is an unyielding, absolutist one that, ironically, fails to acknowledge the complex realities faced by millions of children globally. They conjure a Pandora's box of exploitation, undermining education and perpetuating poverty. But this fear-mongering conveniently overlooks the critical caveat in our motion. In some cases, and under strict regulation and supervision, we are not advocating for a return to unchecked exploitation. We are advocating for a carefully considered framework that addresses specific circumstances. A blanket prohibition, as the negative proposes, does not make child labor disappear. Instead, it often pushes it into the shadows, forcing children into truly dangerous, unregulated, and exploitative situations, far worse than any supervised, age-appropriate, and education-compatible work we envision. We are not pitting the workplace against the classroom. We are proposing scenarios where carefully chosen, limited work can complement education, teach valuable life skills, and provide vital income that keeps families afloat, preventing a deeper plunge into poverty that truly jeopardizes a child's future and access to education. For many, protecting their sacred childhood sometimes means empowering them with safe, regulated avenues to contribute and learn, rather than condemning them to destitution or hidden exploitation.
The affirmative team continues to present their proposal as a nuanced solution, yet their arguments fundamentally misunderstand the very nature of childhood and the practical implications of legalizing child labor. They accuse us of an absolutist stance, but what they label as absolutism we call unwavering protection for children's rights. The claim that our Pandora's box argument is mere fear-mongering and overlooks in some cases and strict regulation is a dangerous underestimation of reality. History and current global realities unequivocally demonstrate that even the most well-intentioned, carefully considered frameworks quickly crumble under the pressures of economic desperation, transforming some cases into many cases and strict regulation into unenforceable guidelines. How, precisely, do they propose to enforce these strict regulations in remote areas, in informal sectors, or within families struggling for survival? Such supervision is a pipe dream, not a practical solution. Furthermore, the argument that blanket prohibition pushes child labor into the shadows is a fallacy designed to legitimize it. Legalizing child labor, even in what they deem safe circumstances, does not eliminate the truly dangerous forms. It legitimizes the concept of children in the workforce, creating a slippery slope. It normalizes the expectation that children should contribute financially, thereby diverting resources, and focus away from tackling the root causes of poverty, which are systemic issues, not a lack of opportunities for children to work. A child's place is in the classroom, not the workplace, regardless of how light or complementary the labor is framed. Their childhood is for learning, growing, and playing, not for becoming an economic unit. We reject the notion that empowering children with safe, regulated work is a solution. True empowerment comes from education, protection from labor, and the freedom to pursue a future unburdened by premature adult responsibilities. Legalizing child labor, even in their carefully crafted some cases, is a concession that will ultimately harm, rather than help, the very children they claim to protect.
Madam Moderator, the negative team questions the practicality of our proposed strict regulation and supervision, dismissing it as a pipe dream and raising the spectre of a slippery slope. This skepticism, while understandable, fundamentally misrepresents our intent and overlooks the current, far more perilous reality. To suggest that enforcing regulations on legal work is impossible is to deny the efficacy of all labor laws. Do we abandon all adult labor laws because some workplaces evade them? Absolutely not. Our framework for some cases would involve clear age thresholds, defined permissible hours that prioritize schooling, strict limits on types of tasks, mandatory health and safety checks, and, crucially, a direct link to educational attainment. We envision a permit system, for instance, that requires proof of school enrollment and attendance, alongside regular inspections, mechanisms that are simply impossible to apply to the illicit, unregulated child labor that thrives in the shadows today.
Madam Moderator, the Affirmative Team's comparison of child labor regulation to adult labor laws is fundamentally flawed. Adult labor laws are designed for individuals who have reached maturity, possess agency, and are expected to be economically productive. Children, by definition, lack full agency, are dependent, and are primarily in a phase of development and education. The complexity of enforcing adult labor laws is already significant. Imagine multiplying that complexity when dealing with vulnerable children, often in informal sectors, agricultural settings, or within their own family units, where such a permit system and regular inspections become utterly impracticable. This is not about denying the efficacy of all labor laws. It is about recognizing the unique vulnerability of children and the real-world difficulty of monitoring millions of individual cases to ensure no child is exploited, no education is compromised, and no health is jeopardized. The very notion of a child needing a permit to work, even if tied to school attendance, normalizes the idea that their primary role could be economic, rather than educational. This legitimization would undoubtedly create the very slippery slope we warn against, making it easier for exploitation to masquerade as regulated work, and diverting attention from the true systemic issues that force children into labor in the first place. The existence of illicit child labor is a call for greater enforcement and investment in education and poverty alleviation, not a justification to legalize a subset of it, thereby blurring the lines and weakening the universal protection every child deserves.
Thank you, negative team. Both sides have presented comprehensive arguments regarding the practicality of regulations and the fundamental nature of childhood. We will now prepare for the closing statements. Affirmative team, you will present your closing statement next.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Esteemed members of the negative team and distinguished audience, as we conclude, let us reflect on the core of our affirmative stance. We are not, and have never been, advocating for the exploitation of children. Instead, we have presented a pragmatic, compassionate, and nuanced argument for legalizing child involvement in certain forms of labor, under stringent regulation and supervision, in some cases. We have consistently highlighted that a blanket prohibition, while perhaps well-intentioned, is not only ineffective but actively harmful. It fails to acknowledge the complex realities faced by millions, pushing children into the very shadows of unregulated and dangerous work that the negative team rightly condemns. Our proposal, conversely, offers a pathway to bring these children into a system where they can be protected, their work can be monitored, and their education can be prioritized and enforced. We have shown that regulating safe, age-appropriate work that complements education, teaches valuable skills, and provides vital income to families struggling with destitution, is not a pipe dream. Mechanisms such as permit systems linked to school attendance, strict hour limits, and health and safety checks are tangible safeguards that cannot be applied to illegal, clandestine labor. Legalizing and regulating allows us to bring oversight where none currently exists, mitigating risks rather than ignoring them. Ultimately, our motion is about effective protection and empowerment. It's about recognizing that for some children, in certain dire circumstances, a carefully managed, legal work opportunity is not a burden, but a lifeline, enabling them to stay in school, contribute to their family's survival, and develop resilience. To deny this possibility out of an absolutist ideal is to condemn them to greater hardship and vulnerability. We urge you to consider a framework that genuinely serves the best interests of all children by acknowledging reality and offering regulated, compassionate solutions.
Thank you, Madam Moderator, esteemed members of the Affirmative Team, and distinguished audience. As we conclude, the Negative Team stands firm in its unequivocal opposition to the motion. Child labor should be legal in some cases. The Affirmative Team has presented a vision of regulated, nuanced child labor as a compassionate solution, a lifeline even, for children in dire circumstances. But let us not be swayed by this deceptive framing. Our core argument has remained consistent. Legalizing child labor, even with the best intentions and promises of strict regulation, opens a Pandora's box of exploitation. We have demonstrated that such regulations are a pipe dream, utterly impractical to enforce in the very informal sectors, remote areas, and desperate family units where child labor predominantly occurs. The comparison to adult labor laws is fundamentally flawed, ignoring the unique vulnerability and lack of agency inherent in childhood. We have warned against the dangerous slippery slope this legalization would create. It normalizes the concept of children as economic contributors, diverting focus from their primary role as learners and individuals deserving of a protected childhood. It will inevitably expand beyond the some cases to many, blurring the lines between acceptable and exploitative work, and ultimately weakening the universal protection every child deserves. True empowerment does not come from premature labor. It comes from education, from safety, and from the freedom to grow without the burdens of work. To address the complex realities of child labor, we must tackle its root causes: poverty, lack of educational access, and systemic failures. Legalizing a subset of child labor is not a solution. It is a concession that risks legitimizing an unacceptable practice. We must invest in education, social safety nets, and robust enforcement against all forms of child labor, pushing it out of existence, not bringing it into the legal framework. Children belong in classrooms and playgrounds, not workplaces. Their childhood is sacred, and their future depends on protection from labor, not its legalization. We urge you to reject this motion and uphold the fundamental right of every child to a childhood free from exploitation.
Thank you, Negative Team, for your closing statement. And thank you to both the affirmative and negative teams for a compelling and insightful debate on the motion. Child labor should be legal in some cases. This concludes our discussion.